My world was shattered twice. The first time was when the yacht of Marco, the love of my life, turned into a column of black smoke on Lake Como. The second time was when I found the photos, and Marco wasn't dead. He was alive and smiling brightly with another family, a new life built on my ashes. He didn't leave me a legacy, but a death sentence from the underworld. My pain turned into a plan for revenge. But the path of revenge led me to an even darker truth. The real traitor was not Marco, but a close person who had been by our side for a long time. It was a June afternoon. Marco wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, his hair still damp after a shower. He kissed me softly on the cheek before stepping onto the yacht. "I'll be back before dinner," he said, his eyes lingering on mine longer than usual. I just nodded. I stood on the shore, watching him walk onto the deck. The engine hummed steadily as the yacht left the dock. Just a few minutes later, an explosion tore through the air. A column of fire erupted, and thick black smoke billowed up. The smell of burning fuel assaulted my nose, making me cough. Everyone ran towards the dock, shouting for help. I took a few steps and then stopped. In front of my eyes, the yacht had turned into a pile of red-hot metal, sinking slowly into the water. No one jumped out. When the rescue team retrieved the first pieces of debris, a police officer approached me, his voice low. "No one survived. It might have been a fuel leak. We will continue the investigation." I heard him but didn't react. My ears were ringing. My throat was tight. My hands were gripping the dock's edge until they ached. Marco was dead right in front of me, just a few hundred meters away. That evening, the news spread across the internet. The newspapers published photos of him in a suit, with a radiant smile under the spotlight. They called him the golden man of the Italian fashion industry. I read every article as if clutching at memories, but the more I read, the more I felt a distance growing between us. I didn't leave the house for 4 days. At night, I lay on my side, facing the pillow next to me, where he used to sleep. It was cold and empty. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the column of smoke rising, then the fire consuming everything. Marco's funeral was held at a large church near the lake. The pews were full. I recognized many famous faces from the fashion world, a few politicians, and even some people I had never met. They came to shake my hand, hug me, and say that Marco was a lucky man to have me. I just stayed silent. The coffin was closed. They explained that his body was too badly burned to be shown. I heard them, but a part of me still wondered what had happened on that yacht. When everyone had left, the family lawyer invited me into a side room. He opened a folder and read every sentence. All of Marco's assets, real estate, shares, and the company's operating rights were left to me. Everyone said he was thoughtful, thinking of me until the very end. I nodded. At that time, I believed it. And I was grateful that amidst my grief, at least I still had something to lean on. After the funeral, the house felt so big that every step echoed like a knock into an empty space. I didn't eat or sleep. During the day, I sat for hours on the living room sofa, my eyes fixed on the window but seeing nothing. At night, I lay still, listening to the ticking of the clock. Chiara, Marco's younger sister, almost moved in completely. She cooked for me, cleaned the house, and answered sympathy calls and messages on my behalf. At night, she slept on the sofa so I wouldn't be alone. I knew she was worried, but I could also see the exhaustion in her eyes. That evening, as I was still sitting motionless by the window, Chiara came over. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down next to me. Her hands were clasped together, gently twisting the hem of her shirt. After a while, she sighed. "Sister, I didn't want to say this, but seeing you like this, I'm afraid you'll never recover if you keep thinking about him the same way." I turned to look at her. She avoided my gaze, took a deep breath, and said, "Marco had been having an affair for many years. The woman wasn't just his mistress, they even had a son together." I was stunned for a few seconds, then immediately refuted her. I told her not to make up stories about the deceased, that she was mistaken. Kiera didn't reply, just looked down at her hands. The room fell into silence. I didn't ask anything more, but I couldn't sleep that night. What she said kept replaying in my head, no matter how hard I tried to push it away. A part of me wanted to prove Kiera wrong, but another part urged me to know the truth. Marco's office was on the upper floor. I had never been allowed to enter that room before. He always said, "Work is boring, you'll get tired of it." I used to find that normal, but now it felt like a door he had deliberately locked away from me. I took the spare key. The lock opened easily, but as soon as the door creaked open, a musty smell of old wood and papers rushed out. The room was dark, with only a narrow beam of light from the window falling onto the large wooden desk in the middle. On the desk, the work calendar was still open to June. Next to it were a few fashion sketches, the drawings I used to proudly show my friends. But under that stack of papers were thick folders, held together by rubber bands. I sat down and pulled each folder towards me. My heart pounded, both with fear and anticipation. I didn't know what I was about to find, but I knew one thing: numbers don't lie. I opened each folder, my eyes scanning the figures. At first, I only intended to skim through, but the more I read, the more I felt a chill run down my spine. The company's financial reports from the last 4 years showed continuous losses. Not just red numbers, but enormous losses. I wondered why I had never heard Marco complain. He always appeared in front of me with a smile and stories about new contracts. Then I saw huge expenses, with no clear purpose. Transfers abroad, cash payments, loan contracts with unusually high interest rates. Some of the entries had the company's stamp, but the recipients' names were completely unfamiliar. My gaze stopped at the steel, safe, cold, and silent, tucked against the wall. I had never seen it open, but I knew the password. Ironically, the password was our wedding date. My fingers trembled as I pressed each number, as if they were betraying their own memories. The safe door clicked open with a dry sound. There weren't as many papers inside as I expected. I took out a thin folder, the cover of which only had one word: contract. This was not a will or a deed of ownership, but a death warrant. It was a loan contract from an organization whose name alone evoked images of violence and debts that were never meant to be forgotten. The loan amount was so large that I had to read it 3 times, trying to convince myself that I had misread the number of zeros. At the bottom, Marco's signature appeared, clear and neat, like a final stab. At that moment, I didn't know if I was trembling from fear or from the rising rage. I only knew that the world I had built with Marco, its first brick had just been shattered. Suspicion was no longer a crack, it was an abyss. My actions were almost instinctive. I sought out a private detective that an old friend had recommended, a man in his 50s, thin and quiet. I placed everything I had found on his desk, including that deadly loan contract. He just nodded and said he would get back to me. A week later, he called. We met at a secluded cafe on the outskirts. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a hidden corner, a thick brown paper envelope in front of him. He didn't say a superfluous word, just pushed it towards me. My hands were freezing as they touched the envelope. The first photo. Marco, the husband I thought was dead, was standing there, healthy and tanned. He wore a white shirt and sunglasses, his hand tightly holding that of a beautiful young woman. The second photo. The woman was carrying a boy of about 3. And then, the last photo. It killed me. Marco stood beside them, his hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder, his eyes filled with a tender affection as he looked at him. It was the look of fulfillment, of a man who had found his real family. A look that I, throughout all my years as his wife, had never received. The detective's voice broke the silence, low and devoid of emotion, like a doctor delivering the worst possible news. He's not dead. The explosion on the lake was fake. He disappeared and took a very large sum of money withdrawn from your company. I held the folder of photos tight. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Everything around me seemed compressed, leaving only Marco's face in the last picture calm, serene, as if our marriage had never existed. I sat motionless. The photos the detective had given me felt like they were burning my fingers. In my mind, the perfect play of my life was crumbling piece by piece. The explosion, the funeral, the loving will, the sympathetic looks of everyone, all suddenly became a meaningless hoax. Are you sure? I tried to keep my voice steady, but it broke at the end of the sentence. This can't be. The detective didn't answer right away. He took a thin folder from his briefcase, carefully placed it on the table, and pushed it towards me, as if handing me a sentence. These are undeniable proofs, ma'am. Company bank statements, security camera footage from the bank, airline ticket records. My hands trembled as I opened the folder. The cold numbers danced before my eyes. 4 days before the explosion, Marco had withdrawn a huge amount of cash from the company fund, an amount of money sufficient to buy a new life. He transferred the entire amount to a Swiss account. The detective continued, his voice firm. The account is in the name of a shell company, but the sole beneficiary is Marco. I flipped to the next page. A copy of an airline ticket. The passenger's name was completely unfamiliar, but the accompanying passport photo was heartbreakingly familiar. It was Marco, and the flight date was the morning after that fateful explosion. My throat was dry, and my chest felt as if someone was squeezing it. And the woman in the photo? I whispered, the question almost swallowed by the silence in the room. He took out another set of photos. Anna Rossi, Marco's long-term mistress. And this boy, he pointed to a brown-haired boy who was smiling, is about 3 years old. The DNA test results we obtained show that Marco is his biological father. I couldn't breathe. And then, that image seared into my mind, a cruel film that replayed over and over. Marco holding the woman's hand, tenderly bending down to fix the cap on their son. A complete, happy family, of which I had never been a part. As if to extinguish the last glimmer of hope, the detective added. Even Chiara, his sister, didn't know about the faked death plan. She just thought it was a simple affair. I sat motionless. This was no longer betrayal. Betrayal means you once meant something to them. This was an erasure. A purge calculated down to the smallest detail, and I was just collateral damage that needed to be cleaned up. That night, I sat alone in the office. What I inherited was not assets. It was a mountain of debt. Debts to the underworld, bank debts, taxes. Marco's entire empire had actually collapsed a long time ago. The will became a bitter joke. He didn't leave me an opportunity. He left a trap. He knew that all the creditors would come to me. And then, the phone started ringing. Unfamiliar male voices, cold, and with only one demand. Marco owes us. Now you have to pay. I understood. Marco didn't just deceive me. He had turned me into a human shield for his escape. My tears had dried up, and my pain gave way to a cold stillness. In that stillness, everything became clear. He had calculated everything. The explosion, the will, and the debts. He needed a shield to take the bullets, and he chose me. I slowly folded the will, officially closing my role as a grieving wife. He thought I was prey. He was wrong. Because now, the hunted would become the hunter. Vengeance doesn't need tears. It needs a plan. I returned to Milan, not as a hunter, but as a subdued prey. I played the role of a widowed wife, devastated, crushed by the burden of debt and willing to do anything to survive. Ricardo took the bait. He presented himself as a benefactor, arranging things with the creditors, but in reality, it was to control all the cash flow. He gave me instructions, names to work with, and accounts to transfer money to. He had no idea that every single one of his instructions was a piece of evidence that I was secretly copying and recording. In my role as a puppet running the company, I had access to everything. During the day, I was a reluctant CEO, tired and obedient. At night, I became a spy in my own empire, secretly sending encrypted information to Marco. From Portugal, Marco, the husband the whole world thought was dead, received that information and turned it into a weapon. He allied with Ricardo's rivals, those who were also trying to overthrow him. An underground network was being formed, and Ricardo, who thought he was the puppet master, was being tied up by his own puppet. When I sent Marco the final piece of evidence, a diagram of Ricardo's entire money laundering network, we knew the time had come. Marco, through an intermediary, sent Ricardo a message. I know what you're doing, I know where you are, and I have enough evidence to burn your entire empire to the ground in 24 hours. Give me back my son, or we all go to hell. Ricardo panicked. He agreed to an exchange. The location was an old warehouse at the port of Genoa at midnight. Marco and I were there first, hiding in the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard I was afraid Ricardo could hear it. Then he arrived, accompanied by 2 bodyguards. And between them, a boy of about 3, looking around blankly. It was my son, Leo. The moment I saw the boy, the world seemed to stop. That wasn't the child from the fake photos. That was my son, in the flesh. Let the boy go. Marco's voice echoed from the shadows, cold and firm. Ricardo signaled to a bodyguard to push Leo towards us. As soon as the boy took a few steps, the trap was sprung. Headlights from the cars parked around us simultaneously lit up, illuminating the entire warehouse. Ricardo's rivals, alerted by Marco, had blocked all the exits. At the same time, the sirens of a special police unit could be heard in the distance, growing louder. Ricardo realized he had been tricked, but it was too late. I rushed out of the shadows and hugged Leo tightly. The warmth of my son, the smell of his hair. Everything was real. The boy cried out in fear, but I knew it was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Ricardo and his entire organization were arrested. The empire built on deception and crime collapsed in a single night. We didn't go back to our old life. The villa on Lake Como, the fashion company, the bank accounts, all belonged to a past we wanted to bury. We sold everything, paid off the legitimate debts, and used the remaining money to disappear. A year later, we are living in a small white house overlooking the sea on a Greek island. There are no extravagant parties or expensive designer clothes here. There is only warm sunshine and the sound of waves. Marco is no longer a powerful businessman. He opened a small carpentry workshop and makes wooden toys for our son every day. I am no longer an editor or a CEO. I am a mother, spending my days teaching Leo to talk and building sand castles with him on the beach. Occasionally, Marco looks at me, his eyes still holding a hint of regret. But I just smile and take his hand. We have been through hell together, and now we have found our own paradise. That afternoon, as the setting sun painted the sea pink, I sat on the porch, watching Marco carrying Leo on his back, running along the sand. My son's pure laughter echoed, mingling with the sound of the waves. Marco's will once wrote, "I want you to be the guardian of our dream." He was wrong. Our dream was not an empire. Our dream, now, is simply family. And finally, it has come true.